We are live.
Under the slogan of shaping our digital future, the Arab International Cooperation and Development Forum, DCDF, will bring together representatives and experts from Arab governments, the business sector, civil society, the technical community, academia, and international organizations. DCDF will be held virtually from 13 to 23 December 2021 by Escrow, LAS, ITU, UNCTAD, and UNDESA. Through almost 30 sessions over 8 days, you can participate in policy debate on priority issues in the fields of internet policies and digital development globally and in the Arab region. DCDF aims to align the Arab tracks of the World Summit on the Information Society and the Internet Governance Forum to maximize opportunities for digital cooperation. Register now to join us in this journey from 13 to 23 December. Together, let's shape our digital future.
Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Baher Asmat. I'm with ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And I'm very glad to be joined by this distinguished panel. And the topic of our workshop, as you know, is maintaining one single global internet. Before we get started, I'd like to allow each panelist to introduce themselves. So let's start with the ladies. Elena.
Thank you, Baher. Hello, everyone. Very nice to be with you, although virtually. I'm Elena Plexida. I'm also part of the ICANN organization team. I work in particular with the government engagement side of our organization, so I will talk to you about that. I'm based in Belgium, Brussels. I have a purely governmental background. I come from my country's government originally, which is Greece, and then have worked in European institutions and so on. Very nice to be with you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Emily?
Thank you very much for asking me to join this panel today, Baher. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm the CEO of Oxford Information Labs, and I've been working in the internet governance and domain name sector for more than 20 years, in fact. I've had a lot of engagement in the Middle East region, thanks to cooperation between ICANN and Baher department and URID, for which I work closely on the issue of internationalized domain names, and have been participating in the Middle East DNS forum and in a previous Arab IGF in the region. I'm also an associate fellow at the think tank Chatham House and editor of their Journal of Cyber Policy, and have been looking at the development of technical standards and their governance implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Adiel?
Thank you, Baher, and I'm very pleased to join this panel today. So I'm Adiel Apogan. I'm Vice President for Technical Engagement at ICANN, so member of the ICANN organization. I have been in the area of technical governance of the internet for the past 25 years and more. I oversee at ICANN its engagement with the technical community in general, but also supporting Elena and others in engaging government on technical aspects of the internet. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Adiel. As you can see, the discussion today is going to be about the regulatory part and the technological part, that may have an impact on the internet and the evolution of the internet. The internet, as you all know, is a global network that operates seamlessly across national boundaries. It connects people from all over the world. It's very decentralized in nature. It's a network of networks, no central authority of any kind. And networks connect together through protocols, standard protocols, and those protocols are developed through open and inclusive processes. So the internet is built on those standards and those protocols, and via those open standards, billions of people can connect together today on the internet. Millions of applications and services are being developed, and they work on the internet, and there is no need for any kind of approval or permission for anyone to connect or for any application or service to work on the internet. And over the past few years, there have been increasing efforts by many countries to introduce internet-related legislations and regulations to address variety of issues, from cybersecurity, e-commerce, privacy, online content, and so on. At the same time, there have also been new technologies emerging, and those technologies often bring some benefits to the end users. Yet some of them may also pose some risks and challenges. And this is what we're going to discuss today. We want to discuss, those regulations and technologies, what they bring to the internet, and what kind of risk they may cause. So, Elena, I'm going to start with you, since the European region is, quite active in this area of regulations. Perhaps the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, has been the most popular sort of, acronym or topic in this area, but it's certainly not the only one. So I'd like to ask you to give us an overview of the legislative initiatives related to the internet, and tell us why do you think they are important and how they could potentially impact the internet. Over to you.
Thank you, Baher. Thank you so much. Yes, indeed, as you said, Europe is a region that produces a lot lately. And it started with GDPR, but there is so much more to it. So I will refer to some of the legislative and non-legislative initiatives that we see coming from there, and what we see and why would it potentially be a concern. Before I go there, let me just at a high level say that from ICANN's perspective, we have absolutely no view, no opinion on the direction of any policy. There are very real problems on the internet, like you mentioned before, the need for privacy for end users, cybersecurity problems, you name it. So for good reasons, governments are trying to find a way to tackle these issues, and that's exactly what they need to do. Where we are focused is that sometimes, of course not always, but sometimes when you're trying to tackle something that is a problem happening in a platform, let's say, or on the internet, unintentionally you might tamper or have an effect on the technical underpinnings of the internet. And essentially this is what we from ICANN perspective are trying to look at, particularly when it comes to legislation from our side. So that said, our engagement has to do with highlighting, pointing out, explaining how the internet works. That's what we want to do. So legislators are very much aware and can make informed decisions on things that, of course, they have to decide upon. So let me give you some examples of legislative initiatives and some non-legislative initiatives as well that are around and we are monitoring. As you said, lots of them come from Europe. A very good example, I think, to make you understand what I mean is the e-privacy regulation, which has been around for a number of years. If I'm not mistaken, it was put forward in 2016 and it is still under negotiation at EU level because it proved to be tricky to negotiate. Now, why were we engaged on that? Why were we interested in that? In e-privacy, there was one specific provision about cookies. It was a very good intention from legislators, of course. What they were trying to do is give back to the end user the right to manage their cookies the way they want. That's of course all fine. Now, the way the original proposal at least was structured, was drafted, it was essentially saying that the end user needs to give consent for this kind of thing at every step of the communication. Why is this an issue? The internet is not like the traditional telephony. In traditional telephony, you have a point where communication starts and a point where the communication finishes. So maybe there, back then, it was easy for the end user to have a say. Now on the internet, as you know, we have countless intermediary networks, countless nodes that a message will go by, let alone that the message does not go as it is. It can be in different packets and different routes. So there is no way for the user to give consent in all these different ways that a message, an email, say, is going. So essentially that would, if you wanted end users to give consent to everything, that would break the routing of the internet, and no one wants that, nor was that the intention, just as an example. In the same thread of thought, another example is the European Data Protection Board. European Data Protection Board is this body that brings together all the data protection authorities of Europe. I'm just referring now to a specific interpretation that they made on how domain names and URLs should be treated. So the board was asked a question, and in reply to this question on how GDPR, as you mentioned before, should apply, they gave an answer and stated in this answer that processing data such as domain names or URLs is unlawful unless consent of users is obtained. Now, what they did with that statement is essentially they made DNS data personal information. And this is a basic misunderstanding of how the underlying internet infrastructure works. DNS is, and I'm very happy I have Adil here with us, because he will correct anything I don't say technically correct. So DNS is traffic data to identify the source and the destination of the communication. How are you to convey this communication if you are saying it's unlawful unless the user gives consent? It is necessary for traffic management. There would be issues with the traffic management if you treat DNS data in this way. Again, we had from Europe a court order at some point, maybe you're aware of that, that said that IP addresses could be under certain conditions personal identifying information. That again would be the same problem. Essentially we would have solved a lot of issues on the internet because you would not be able to go on the internet. You cannot give consent to an IP address before you even get it, so you could not go on the internet. Now, while I'm on data protection laws, Europe is definitely not the only region we're looking at, not the only region that is working on data protection. So Brazil, India, Vietnam, Singapore, to name a few. China, the personal information law in China had attracted our attention. It is a law, again, that is close to GDPR, but not identical. So there, the issue we would see is you need to have a legal basis to be able to process data. In China, the law does not accept the legitimate interest, which is for us a legal basis that we use a lot. So that would be an issue from our perspective technically. Or also there is a data security law now in China. Data cannot be moved out of China without the approval of the Chinese government under this law. Why am I mentioning that? As you know, ICANN demands, says to the operators that there should be an escrow in case there is a problem. So in case there is a problem, we would have a problem to help the users obtain again the domain names, because the Chinese government will have to give agreement. You know, the escrow operators are not necessarily all in China or somewhere.
Elena, just to clarify, escrow operators are operators that keep a sort of backup copy of the registry system or the registration system of the registries. So, I mean, if you can explain it in a better way, please do, but I wanted to clarify what Escrow means.
No, I can't, and I'm very thankful that you're intervening on such things. And I also look to ADL for any clarification on technical stuff. Absolutely. Let me turn to platform regulation, which is again a very prominent issue with respect to regulation. The other big thing. So a message that we're consistently insisting on is that platforms is not the internet. There is a distinction that needs to be made there. An example, again, coming from Europe, is the Digital Services Act, which is a regulation that is being discussed right now, and it's for platforms, nothing to do with us. And as I said, we have no opinion either way on the policy. Why am I discussing that? In this regulation, DNS services are coming into focus indirectly and in a small part, if you will, because considering the rest of the big things that the platform regulation is dealing with, it is a small part. So it is again a good intention, trying to say that DNS services, because they have nothing to do with content, they should not be liable for content, right? Nevertheless, the way it is put there, it is saying that they will only be benefiting from this exception from liability if they're mere conduit, caching, or hosting. Now, technically, and of course, again, Adiel understands much better than me on that, and all my information comes from Octo, is if you look at DNS services technically, they do not necessarily qualify as mere conduit or casting or hosting. What would be the effect of that going forward? You might have to end up in courts because the DNS services would not be sealed from its liability. And we have a very tangible example already. In Germany, there's a court that issued an injunction against Quad9. Quad9 is a resolver. All a resolver is doing is helping you as an end user get to the website you want. I try to put it as more simple as I can and be as more accurate as I can. So they have nothing to do with the content. But someone went against them to the court and asked that they are held not liable as such, yes, liable actually, for resolving to a website that was giving particular content. Now, they were not deemed the perpetrator, but they were deemed to have involvement in intellectual property infringement. There is a huge fine per query if they resolve, per query, right? Not generally. It's a huge fine, and there's also imprisonment in case they continue doing that. Now, why am I saying all that? Imagine if certain DNS services or operators of the services that are doing the basic infrastructure stuff, or they are doing their work on a voluntary basis, if they are open to huge fines, the provision of the service will definitely change. And that, in the long run, will change for the end users. It will not be the same for the end users. What if they need to do filtering so they avoid the fines? These kind of concerns I'm raising with you, and that's what I'm trying to say. Finally, cybersecurity, of course, a very big thing. In Europe, back in December, we had the so-called NIS2, Network Information Security Directive. The NIS is an existing directive, so NIS2 is a proposal to update it. And we have together with this the EU cybersecurity strategy. There we saw from the European Commission is the body within the EU that puts forward the proposals. So we saw in this proposal the idea to regulate the root servers. If I can be more particular, to put cybersecurity obligations and reporting obligations on the root servers. Now that is definitely misleading in the sense that there is no cybersecurity issue with the root servers. The provision of the service has been there for 32 years with no problem at all. So what's the problem of this trying to be solved? And again, on cybersecurity, it could in the end be actually counterproductive with respect to the security and stability of the DNS instead of doing something good for this service. I spoke a lot, I think. I thought, I'm sorry if I sound grave, it's maybe the nature of my job. I'm supposed to be concerned. But there are also, if I can leave you with a positive message, it doesn't mean that there cannot be improvements or there cannot be innovation. And we are there to also, we're very happy to share our technical expertise with things that can be improved as well, and where governments can help. Like an example is that we're working with ITUD in particular, in Africa more in particular. And yep, there are also positive things as well. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. And so clearly, what I got from what you said is that even though those regulations were developed in Europe within the European Union region, and they meant to protect the privacy of European users, to provide more security, and so on. But clearly, their impact goes way beyond that, because the internet, probably the reason is that the internet does not recognize boundaries. So even though we attempt to make regulations within certain boundaries, but their effect on the internet is global. So with that, I want to turn to Emily. So what do you think about this notion of developing regulations with the intention to protect or provide better internet to our citizens within a country or a region, but then we realize that the effect of those regulations goes probably to the entire internet.
Thank you very much, Baher. And I'd just like to really build on some of the remarks made by Elena, which is that clearly in a global network on which individual countries' economies and social activity increasingly relies, building out new types of implementations like smart cities, which are very, very popular in this region, then clearly the government will want to do things to protect its citizens from harms. And as Elena pointed out it very carefully in her statements, a lot of these initiatives come from a good place, from trying to solve problems, and nobody, even the best advocate for the internet, would claim that it is free from problems, whether it's cybersecurity or other harms. But this is the sort of what comes into being then is a lot of complexity and potential incompatibility. You mentioned, Baher, the beauty of the internet is that it sticks together incompatible networks with these very lightweight interoperable protocols that just make everything go. And the key thing to enable a lot of the innovation and activity that we've seen over the last 20 years and that has kept us all online during the pandemic and able to function is the ability for data to really flow very freely across borders. And whether it comes from a good intention or whatever, what's increasingly happening is that laws are being put into place that get in the way of that free flow of data. I'll just give an example to complement some of the examples given by Elena, which is at Chatham House last year, we did a simulation between the UK and India, and we had groups, it was all online, of course, because of the pandemic, but we had groups in India and the UK. And the story was, imagine that the new Indian data protection regulation is now law, and we are trying to restore data from an outsourced partner in response to a rapid response to a cyber attack, like a ransomware attack. And because, as Elena was saying, there's a real trend in data protection laws for countries to say, well, certain types of data in certain circumstances cannot move offshore, or we want them protected and kept onshore. That means that moving data across borders suddenly becomes more complicated. And so what we were finding, in fact, often regulation has very perverse consequences, but in response to a sort of an emergency situation where actually everybody in the room wants to get back up on their feet and get the business going again after a ransomware attack or something, what you end up doing is thinking, well, how can I avoid using certain countries? How can I avoid my data touching that? Because it's all too complicated. I'm trying to balance what I know about the EU law, the UK law, the Indian law. Goodness knows what other citizens I've got in there. I haven't really got it all organized. So you end up with a sort of regulatory arbitrage where you're choosing where you're not going to be operating, where you're not going to be storing data. And if this trend goes on in this way, it's going to be on a collision course with a single global interoperable network where data can flow freely. So somehow we have to all, as policy makers or advisors or experts, we have to try to sort of reconcile very incompatible objectives, but that all of those objectives are good. It's quite right that countries should want to make their own laws for their own citizens. Is also a global benefit for data to flow freely across borders, and for those lightweight protocols not to be kludged up with lots of complexity and weighed down by lots of red tape. So it's a very interesting area to explore, and this sort of, expressions like digital sovereignty, which is very popular in the EU, and it is a very emotive issue for many countries. The idea we should actually have control over our data. It speaks to people. At the same time, and you can't, in response to it, say, well, sorry, you can't have any of that control because of the sanctity of the internet. What we have to do is try to move a little bit closer and see if we can at least partially reconcile those rather incompatible objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And I just want to remind everyone to, if they have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat, and we'll have ample time also for Q&A at the end. So, Emily, you mentioned the, data flow and the free flow of information. And I think one of the key reasons why this is, possible on the internet is the fact that the internet is built on, those open standards and so on. So I want to turn to Adiel now to talk about those open standards, because what we've been seeing recently and hearing, claims about the TCP/IP, which is the fundamental protocol of the internet, that is TCP/IP is not adequate for new services, new applications that require, high throughput, low latency, and so on. And there have been some efforts to develop new protocols or new systems that somehow, I think, deviate from the fundamental architecture of the internet. So, Adiel, what is your take on this?
Thank you very much, Baer, and very interesting to listen to Elena and Emily to touch on the policy side. And Elena, I can reassure you that you get it all right. You don't need me. So that's good. So definitely the world is evolving and technology are evolving, application around the internet also are evolving, and all of that take into consideration open up a lot of questions, and I think the key issue or challenge right now is how we play the balancing act between the policy and protection of privacy and people usage of the internet in general, and the evolution of the technology while keeping the permissionless nature of the internet. And that balancing act is where the challenge and friction are coming from now. As you mentioned, Bayer, there is a lot of work being done to actually project ourselves in the future and see how the internet is going to evolve. You mentioned, new protocol, kind of the new IP, which is the buzzword right now about the evolution of the internet, which, in fact, putting it back into its context, emanate from a work that the Network 2030 focus group did on the request of the ITU-T study group 13 to actually look at what could be the challenge of the future internet. What are the evolution of the technology? And they came back in their report with a series of futuristic use cases of things that can happen on the internet, like holographic communication, digital twin, which is representation of physical thing on the digital world, industrial IoT, and so on. So those evolution may require the internet, the protocol, to work differently. Because of that work, of course, and that is also something fundamental, permissionless, innovation, and again, ICANN as organization has no say or no resistance on evolution of any kind of technology. Our goal here is to always look at any evolution that may impact the global internet as we know it today, or harm the security and stability of the DNS by itself. So the outcome of Network 2013 has been used by some vendor like Huawei to come up with here are the new feature that we can put out there that will help us solve those futuristic use case that Network 2030 is come up with. The issue, though, with that is on twofold. The first thing is that some of the features that are in there are not compatible with the openness, the open standard and the open protocol that we know, which is the underlying element of the success of the internet that we know today, right? For instance, one of the features of the so-called new internet, new IP, is that each packet will embed a contract, and that contract is what guarantee the quality of the service that will be provided. And that contract will be explored by each intermediary device. What does it mean? Like every packet that cross a switch, a router on the road, have to be inspected to know what the contract is and how to treat the packet. That already poses a problem for privacy, right? Because every packet are open to scrutiny by intermediary that you have zero contract about, right? Zero knowledge of. That's for instance is a potential problem there. Also, some of those technology involve reviewing the whole infrastructure that supports the IP infrastructure today. My personal experience dealing with IPv6 show me that it is a huge, dream to expect transition from a technology that requests a revamp of their architecture. We are 30 years down the road with IPv6, and we're still talking about adoption of IPv6. Why? Because it was not compatible with the previous infrastructure and required huge investment. And when you are facing such situation as business, you take decision that makes sense. for both your business and user in general. So those technology that requests building new infrastructure that are not compatible with IPv4 and IPv6 infrastructure that we have today have little chance to succeed the way they are in general. I also believe in something when we go into innovation is that no matter the amount of resistance that can come for a new technology or its evolution, it's not the resistance that make it successful. Is the social and economical impact that it has that will make it successful, right? It is how easy it will be adopted. It's how compatible it will be to not disrupt, you know, the business model and the economic of the technology in general, and how useful it will be to advance user in general. So there will be new, several initiatives and new IPs. One of them, there is a other one, which is the non-IP network that is driven by the HC and its industry-specific group as well, which also is building that new approach to communication out of the outcome of Network 2030 futuristic use case as well, and proposing something different as well, and saying, well, we will use we will add a label to packet and add to those label a way of prioritizing them and so on. Again, to address some issue around latency and so on. All those initiatives are still at the very infancy stage. Some of them are being approached from top-down perspective, which has shown for a long time that it doesn't scale well. It doesn't work well in the world that we live in today. We will see how it will evolve. And some of them are trying to go through the bottom-up multi-stakeholder approach. All that being said, my belief is that TCP/IP and the IP that underline the work of the internet today has shown its ability to adapt and adjust to the evolution of the technology. We have witnessed that with the pandemic. When the internet started, if we were told that we will be holding meeting of thousands of participants online with video conferencing and working real time, it will be impossible. But today we are able to do that with the evolution not only of the protocol itself, but the infrastructure as well. So we have to look at it from all the layers perspective. And I believe that the IP protocol that underline the internet today will continue to evolve, will adjust itself, taking particularly in account the priority that is coming from the needs, and the user needs will be the key of the evolution of this sustainable evolution, if I can mention it. There are other approach or other alternate, I would say, universe that is coming up as well, built around blockchains and blockchain domains, which is something that is relevant to ICANN somehow. But that is a different approach because it's creating completely an alternate name system, which is not based on the roots that we know and that ICANN has a responsibility around. And today, most of them doesn't work compatible in a compatible way with the DNS that we know today, because they request additional plugin, and they work only in the context of specific application related to the blockchain environment. At ICANN, of course, as I mentioned originally, we don't have a position against or for a technology particularly. What we care about is a technology that does not put the internet at risk, doesn't put the DNS at risk, technology that does not create instability and insecurity to the global internet as we know it today. So what we do is to study those emerging technology, look at them from a very neutral perspective, identify where challenge could be for the DNS that we have responsibility for, and which challenge that they may pose to the global internet, not creating, split or parallel internet with the various speeds. So for new IP, for instance, we have worked on a very good paper published in October 17 that described the concept, because it's still a concept. We haven't found any deep definition of the new IP as protocol, and I think that's why even it has been completely removed from the table of study group 13 of the ITU, but probably to reincarnate in different format elsewhere. And that paper actually gives a lot of information on what the concept is and how it can be looked at compared to the IP protocol that we use today. And we released recently as well another one on the non-IP network that is driven by XC. I will stop there and probably be happy to have to answer any question related to those technological evolution.
Thank you, Adiel. And I know that you need to leave before the top of the hour. So I hope if we have any technical questions, please direct them to Adiel before he leaves the session. So Adiel, you touched on I think three main like sort of technologies or proposals for new models, new IP, non-IP networks, and the blockchain domains, which is a little different, but still it may have the same impact of sort of breaking the unity of the internet, particularly the identifier or the naming system of the internet. Now, I want to turn to Emily. So Adiel, you covered the technological side of these proposals or these evolutions, but I think there is also a process of developing those or proposing those models or those protocols or those standards. And what I heard Adiel say, at least with the new IP proposal, that it didn't follow the same standardization process that the internet community is used to. And you mentioned something like top-down approach and so on. And my question to Emily, because Emily, I know that you've done some research in this, particularly in new IP. So again, what is your take on proposals such as new IP, proposals that come from more or less outside the technical community that we know it, but also proposals that, as Adiel said, are not compatible with the fundamental features of the internet in terms of openness and so on. And also, I want you to, if you can, I mean, how do you see the end, or maybe not the end, but what do you think these proposals will lead to? Are we going to see a new models or new versions of the internet? Are they going to, eventually just, fade out? So how do you see this?
Thank you very much for that, Baher. And well, I think what we're seeing at the moment, Adiel has given a real technical view of the merits and demerits of the new IP proposals. From a sort of geopolitical point of view, what we see is standards, technical standards, which have been, a fairly overlooked domain, populated by engineers, primarily from democratic countries and in the US and Europe, for example, we are seeing this space becoming increasingly contested, and also the strategic use of certain bodies, which, as you mentioned, Baher, were unexpected. You would expect from a technical point of view for new standards proposals that seek to upgrade the internet or tweak certain standards or make some improvements, you would expect those to be done in the Internet Engineering Task Force, the multi-stakeholder expert body that has traditionally done internet standards. Instead, they were proposed through a number of study groups, and Adiel mentioned a couple of them, but we also see proposals that all in the ITU, the UN body, ITUT. We also saw proposals, as well as the ones that Adiel mentioned, going through in study group 11 on protocols and test specifications, study group 13, future networks, multimedia in study group 16, security in study group 17, Internet of Things and smart cities in study group 20, as well as the network 2030 group that Adiel mentioned. So what we're seeing is a lot of activity. And actually, although those proposals are now off the table, I agree with Adiel. We're very likely to see reincarnations, repackaging, probably some forum shopping and different choices of venues. Now, Adiel was very much going from the point of view, and I really felt for you on you know, we've all been involved in the endless IPv6 transition, which is coming soon and has been for the last 20 years. And you're absolutely right that introducing big changes very, very to a deep fundamental level in an existing network, you're going to have to combat a lot of inertia. What I think we need to also turn our attention to is who are these proposals actually targeting? And the advocacy around them is that we're targeting those who are offline, the 3 billion, the people who don't have a network. And of course, it's a bit like restoring an old house or building a new house. If you build a new house, it's much cheaper and much easier because you don't have to fiddle around all the edges and be compatible. And that's where I feel we need to ask the right questions about new IP. We definitely need to do the technical takedown and analysis that Adiel's talking about. But we also need to ask ourselves not, you know, is this technically full of merit or not, but could we end up with it by accident or design? And I think the answer is definitely a yes on that. There's a lot of uncertainties. We don't know what it would look like, but we can see that China, where these proposals have emanated from, that it has published a national strategy on standards, and the process is to standardize locally, nationally, and then internationally. We've seen announcements of test beds of a new type of internet fit for the new generation involving 40 universities within China. So there's something happening. And Huawei, which has been very much central to the proposals, has also indicated that there are test beds and implementations at the national level. So what does this mean for recipients of new IP? So you're right, absolutely, Adiel. You know, in a sort of traditional, like I would say, most market economy based environments, the thing that is most useful and most convenient to users wins. In an authoritarian environment where you have 1.5 billion people, you don't have to worry so much about that. And so implementation at the domestic level in China is definitely plausible. And for the 3 billion people who are currently offline without a network, one could imagine, particularly with the involvement of manufacturers of equipment such as Huawei, a very extensive network of the Belt and Road, and also generosity as a donor country to many countries in the global south, that IP could just arrive, new IP could just arrive, be delivered either with a new box or a software update, and that countries may not get what they're bargaining for. You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And despite the generosity of China in building out technical infrastructure, something I may say that neither the multi-stakeholder community nor the West has fully got an answer to. Despite that generosity, there may be the small print, there may be something more than one bargains for. And in the context of digital sovereignty, where we started this conversation, you also have to ask yourself, what does this mean for our digital sovereignty? Where does the data go? You have to ask yourself that wherever you're getting your internet from. But I think that, you know, there is absolute, you know, I can 100% agree with what Adiel's saying on the technical level. We also need to look wider. We need to look at the protections afforded for standards and under the World Trade Organization rules, which prevent technologies built to those standards from being banned in international trade. And so there is actually quite a lot of moving parts here that we need to take account of if we are really serious about preserving an internet. And just one more thing before closing is that, you know, those who advocate for the single global interoperable internet, including me, have to really answer the question of, well, what is the deal for the global south? What are we giving the global south apart from, you know, lecturing about the benefits? What is actually our tangible offer? And I think that there is a real role for the swing states, for those in this region and others, to articulate their needs, and for the multi-stakeholder community to be serving those needs as well and answering those requests.
Thank you, Emily. And I like your closing remark or question about, you know, the deal for the global south. I think this is a big question. It's been, you know, like discussed in many forums, at least for the past 20 years. So and I think we still need to look into that. And I hope that, you know, forums like this one, the Arab, you know, IGF or the Digital Cooperation Forum, I hope that they will also, you know, look at, you know, such questions and try to also provide some guidance there. Okay, we got one question in the Q&A, and Adiel answered the question. Thank you, Adiel. Still, if anyone has any
if
questions,
you allow me, before I just disconnect, just want to say something quickly and follow up with what Emily and Elena said originally, tied to the technical. It's very critical to look at the internet as a global infrastructure. I mean, when we remove the globality out of it, we start seeing things at the scale of a country, as a group. But that's not what makes the internet successful. When we remove that from it, the success that we are enjoying today of the internet, and that is valid for everyone, right? Everywhere, is because the internet is global, and it's because it gives us a platform that goes beyond the small limitation that we used to have, right? I have the privilege to witness other technology like the Minitel. Have been very active developing thing around the Minitel, right? But it's not the same thing. It's not the same globality that you have with the internet, which makes it successful at a certain level, but not as we know. So all of these things, we need to always goes back to what is the benefit we are getting from playing in this global platform, in this global environment where we have the ability, one, to expose what we can do, the innovation at the global level, but also reap out the benefit, which is financial, commercial, and business-wise. So I think that paradigm that has to also be in the reflection of the geopolitical aspect, as Emily mentioned, there for a long-term approach to this. Unfortunately, I have to jump into another event that we are having today, which is the Resolver Forum, where some of these discussions are going to happen as well, and I'm moderating that, so I will have to to go in few minutes, but it was a great pleasure exchanging with you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Adiel. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I want to go back to Elena. Elena, I did touch quickly on NIS. I think it's something like Network Information Service, whatever. But because you mentioned that it did, have some DNS, a component in it. So I want you to, if you can clarify that, please, and what kind of impact, would NIS have, or NIS2, which is the updated regulations, what kind of impact would they have on the DNS?
Yes, thank you, Baher. It has NIS2 has that is a lot on the DNS, but I singled out the intention to regulate the root servers in particular, and it is a perfect example of what of the points that Emily was making and Adiel was making about the globality of the system. That's really why I singled that out. If I can be more, if I can go into a little bit more of detail. So the root servers, as you might know, there are 13 machines around the globe that all they do is they publish the root zone file. They're very stupid. That's all they do. And they're not only 13, as we tend to keep them in mind. All of them have instances. So you have around more than 1,400 of these machines globally doing this work, publishing the root zone, that's all. Now, the system is resilient and it works because of this big number of instances that are around the globe. And of course, another important point to make is you don't have to have an instance next to you to be served. You can be served from wherever globally. It's a global system. So when the EU is coming out with an idea that certain obligations should be imposed unilaterally on the root servers, at the end, if I take it from the cybersecurity perspective, as I said before, it could have the effect of only diminishing it. Like obligations on the root servers and exposure to fines, because NIS2 also says, if you fail to report, we will fine you. The only effect that could possibly have is that those operators that are doing it on a voluntary basis, they don't do it for money, could just choose to drop out. So in the end, you have less machines globally. I'm not talking about Europe, globally. And so you have less resiliency. It's an excellent example of, again, as I say, what Emily said, what Adiel said. It's a global system. It is, of course, laudable to try to make it, and to say that we want to make it more as more resilient as possible. And that's good. We recognize this and we want to help as always. But you can do that globally for the whole world, or you diminish the resilience for the whole world again. It's this digital sovereignty idea that Emily was talking about before. This might have can't come into practice if you're talking about, I don't know, software development in a particular country. When you cascade this idea down to the underpinnings of the internet, to the DNS that we're discussing now, it doesn't really apply. There's I don't know how we can reconcile these objectives. It's great, you can do it for the whole world, or you can diminish the resilience for the whole world. That's why I insisted on this example. By the way, just to say that it's not only Europeans that had this idea, also the US, in considering the Cyber Notification Act, I think is the name. When considering, they had this idea as well. Maybe we should think about the root servers or the root itself. But they quickly realized, and I'm happy to say also the Europeans now, that if we want to know more about the root servers, which is great, fine, of course, we can go into the space where globally these policies are being developed. In this particular example is the AirSAC within ICANN. In others, it can be other internet fora. And we can ask for it, so that whatever comes out, reporting or knowing more, will be global and would be good for all of us to know. It's not the way to go about it. That's my point at the end. Thank you, Baher.
Thank you, Elena. Okay, I think we still have about maybe 15 minutes. If there are any questions or comments from the audience. I don't see any in the chat or in the Q&A pods, but I would encourage everyone to ask questions or come to the mic, the virtual mic. And until we get questions, so what, I think my takeaway from this discussion is that, despite all the efforts that, what we call the multi-stakeholder community have been doing in the past, like 2 decades, there are still clearly significant gaps, between, this discussion probably we're focusing on one side on the government and policymakers and so on, and the other side, the technical community who develops standards and operate, infrastructures. So the gap is still there. So does that mean, and this is, a question, and not, I don't think we don't have to come up with an answer, but question is, over like 20 years of time, so couldn't we do a better job, in sort of bridging this gap? Emily, if you want to, like react to this one, please do.
I think, we're all human, and the internet is the product of human beings. And of course, it's not perfect. And efforts to regulate, they may come from real concerns, of course, but sometimes they fall short. In the early industrial revolution during the sort of 19th century in the country I come from, the UK, there was something like 17 different factory acts trying to cope with this completely new way of living. People moving from the country who'd previously lived on farms and worked in an agricultural setting were suddenly crowded into cities, working in very unsafe environments. But it took 17 different attempts to get it right. And that was just in one country. So this isn't easy. But I think that where we need to pay more attention, I think it's a real contrast point between the standards environment and the legislative environment. Standards, the focus is on let's look at the interfaces. Let's look at how we keep things interoperable, so that some things fit in, light bulbs fit in the right way in the light and it works. With laws, we don't really do that. It's like every country has their sovereignty, of course, but there is also a benefit in ensuring that laws are interoperable where they can be. And so that things that really ought to be preserved, like the interoperability, the free flow of data, and so on, those can be preserved in some way. But that means that countries will need to talk to each other in their early legislative thinking, as well as talking to other stakeholders. And it really highlights the role of organizations like ICANN in going as an expert, independent and neutral, working with everybody across all sorts of political divides. This is becoming rarer and rarer in our environment, and a really important role to keep the doors open where we can, find areas for cooperation, find areas where we need to stand up and make a stand against certain proposals because they are going to break things. But I think if I reflect back over the last 20 years, what I would say is that we as a community have not been rapid enough to recognize the legitimacy and the legitimate role of governments in their own respective roles and responsibility over this network. And particularly when we're talking about the global south, there is a huge capacity gap in the ability to even participate in the relevant debates. And it is often governments where that capacity is held. And so we need to engage much more with governments, but within a multi-stakeholder setting. And also when I think about the gaps in standards, I have to say that the multi-stakeholder Internet Engineering Task Force and other standards organizations have got some challenges in engaging people from other regions, women, and people who do not traditionally take part in standards. And I have to say that the UN organizations have processes in place to try to onboard new blood and make the whole thing a bit more accessible. So I think there's a lot of learning that can take place in both directions. The goal is to make sure that there is, particularly for the Global South, a network that enables that growth, that enables all of the societal and economic benefits that we have seen, and innovation that we have seen the internet has driven over the last 20 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. And I think you're right. Keeping the doors open, I think, is key. And again, this is one good reason why we're having these discussions, why we're having, the IGF as well as national and regional IGFs to, to bring everyone together and explore, more opportunities for collaboration and so on. Okay, I think, yeah, let me see. I think there's a question. No, this was answer to the first question. Okay, so any closing remarks, Emily or Elena, before we wrap this up? I don't see any questions from the audience.
I think there is
one open question.
Yeah, one
Yes.
open question on consumer protection.
Okay. It's a long question, so let me read the question. Well, I don't have answer to this question. Elena, I'm not sure if you do, but in any case, we can take note of the question and come back with the answer. I don't have answer to this question.
I think I could only just say more generally in response to the question that ICANN has in place, since the transition of the IANA function in 2016, there are several specific reviews, of which consumer trust is one of them. I may have not got the name or acronym exactly right, but so the replacement for the affirmation of commitments, which you mentioned in the question, is the new settlement following the transition of the IANA function from the government oversight of the United States to the global multi-stakeholder community. And as part and parcel of that, ICANN has undertaken to go through regular reviews in various areas, of which consumer trust is one.
If I may, very, very briefly, and thank you, Emily, for that. There are, as you are very well aware, different constituencies that bring into ICANN. This is a very good thing and unique with the ICANN environment. All the different interests, including the consumer protection one. One thing, though, that I wanted to highlight here is this is not, if I may put it that way, establishing a global standard for consumer protection or for, I don't know, IP infringement, or for what is a geo name, geographical indicator, is not as such part of the ICANN mission. These things we take from other organizations that are responsible for that, and we need to apply in the digital space. Just as a general remark. Thanks.
Thank you both. Okay, any final remarks?
Just to say, sorry, go ahead, Elena.
Please.
Just to say, first of all, thank you very much to you, Baher, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I've learned a lot from the other panelists, and I think that we're definitely seeing big trends affecting the governance of this global network. First of all, it is the emergence of a sort of multipolar world where there is no longer one country or group of countries or one specific ideology that is winning, and we're going to have to cope with a global network in the context of different visions, very different visions for what that network should be. And in that environment, the role of non-aligned states is going to be very critical. And those states need to really reflect on, you know, the balance of power that they have, and also their own vision for this and what it can do for their people and their economies. I think that the other big trend that we're seeing, and we've been discussing today, is governmental regulation of the network. I think that this is inevitable. It has always been inevitable. And our trick has got to be to maintain at once a respect for where those regulations are coming from, but also the advocacy and reminding ourselves of the benefits of those simple, global, interoperable, lightweight protocols on which this whole thing was built. And they have been incredibly successful, incredibly flexible and resilient in the face of lots of challenges. I think it's becoming a cliche to talk about how the internet has responded to the pandemic, but let's talk about that. And we should talk about that, and we should include it in our advocacy, because it's easy to sort of take something for granted when it's just there. And for too many people in the global south, it's not just there. We as a multi-stakeholder community need to have a proper response for that and a proper deal for the global south. And I think that that should help us to face these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. It couldn't have been put better. I always enjoy panels with Emily, and following her, I mean, she always makes me reflect more on things. Yeah, I couldn't have put it better. It's not all bad. The internet is there, and look at the pandemic, indeed. And so we can, going forward, build on this success and see how we do better. Absolutely. Legislation is going to come. Governments definitely have a role, because there are real problems on the internet, and no one is denying that. They do have a role.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both, Emily and Elena. And of course, thanks to Adiel, who has to drop off earlier. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. And thanks also to Escrow and the organizers for allowing us the opportunity to organize this session. Thank you all, and I wish you a very fruitful rest of the meeting. Good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Under the slogan of shaping our digital future, the Arab International Digital Cooperation and Development Forum, DCDF, will bring together representatives and experts from Arab governments, the business sector, civil society, the technical community, academia, and international organizations. DCDF will be held virtually from 13 to 23 December 2021 by Escrow, LAS, ITU, UNCTAD, and UNDESA. Through almost 30 sessions over 8 days, you can participate in policy debate on priority issues in the fields of internet policies and digital development globally and in the Arab region. DCDF aims to align the Arab tracks of the World Summit on the Information Society and the Internet Governance Forum to maximize opportunities for digital cooperation. Register now to join us in this journey from 13 to 23 December. Together, let's shape our digital future.